Hello, welcome to Tech Talk with Steve, episode 44. This is a BICSI Winter Conference recap. We're fresh back from BICSI last week, and we thought it'd be a good time to do a recap. And because of that, we have a very special guest. Carol Everett Oliver, RCDD, ESS, DCDC, is the principal of CEO Communications and the current president of BICSI's Board of Directors for 2022 through 2024. She has over 20 years of ICT experience, including technical training, writing white papers, and case study articles, and other marketing duties. She was the chair of the BICSI Intelligent Building, BICSI 007 Standards Subcommittee, and continues to be member of the mentorship program and one of the founding members of Women in BICSI. Welcome, Carol.
Well, hey, thank you very much for inviting me.
Hey, who better than the president of BICSI to help us with a BICSI recap? I mean, this is great. And you and I were talking about this the other day. I've seen you at so many BICSI conferences through the years that you're kind of like you're BICSI. You know, if you're not there, it's not a BICSI conference, it seems.
Uh-oh. That's a lot of pressure. And this one was especially great because, we celebrated 50 years of conferences in
Exactly.
in Tampa, and there was so much going on. So when you said, "Well, let's do a recap," I'm trying to think of where to start because there was so much going on, at all times, whether it was on the exhibit floor or, or in the sessions. So there were 40 technical sessions. On the exhibit floor, there were 131 exhibitors and 19 new ones, that's always great to see. New
Wow.
exhibitors. Um, there were attendees. So, we've been doing the live conferences. We've been sort of locked down in COVID, and we've sort of came out in 2021 with the one in Vegas, and then we had, 2022, of course, we did both conferences, and they were a bit on the small side, and people were, when are we going to get back to normal? This conference looked like we were getting back to normal. So I was really happy to see that. We talk about 50 years of conferences. The first conference, which was held in Tampa, had, I think, 115 attendees, 14 exhibitors, and 13 presentations.
Wow.
So I'm actually surprised that they had 115 attendees. So this time I have some pre-con stats for you if you want to hear them.
Sure.
So the pre-con stats there were 2,300 registered before the conference started. But then you sort of have to add in about 900 to 1,000 more people who show up the day of or passes that they've received from exhibitors. So it really is a lot more, than that. This is just for the on-site registration. You also have to realize that because we're just getting out of COVID, or we think we are, that we still have that virtual conference, and that's coming up on February 22nd for a month. So, people who attended the live BICSI conference will also get access to the virtual one too. So people like myself, I tell you what was really hard. You talk about me being BICSI person, and it's very difficult for me to make my way through the halls without talking to somebody like yourself and a lot of people that are probably watching now. But I try to make it a point to not keep running from one thing to the next. So what I'm looking forward to is actually going online and seeing some of the sessions that I didn't get to see.
Yeah, same here. I think I only got to sit through one or two sessions, other than the ones I was participating in,
Yeah,
and they were good, but it would have been nice to be able to do more.
yeah. It was, it was difficult. It's like then at a couple of times you go, well, should I go in the exhibit hall? Oh, the exhibit hall is going on at the same time. There were some sessions going on, so it was tough. When I think back to the early BICSIs, and you and I have been going to BICSIs since the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
And at one point, well, early on, they had the presentations in the same room as the exhibitors. I don't know if you remember that way
I
back when.
do. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah. So they would turn the lights out and have the technical sessions going on in the same room. So I that was interesting.
Yeah, I can remember one year being in tent outside of the venue because there wasn't enough conference room floor. There was another conference going on that was obviously more important than us. So we were in tents with wooden floors and, on the outside of the building, and then the presentations were adjacent to it.
Yeah, I remember that too. I think that was at the Coronado Springs in Orlando, and
Might be,
it
yeah.
was in the parking lot, and they had at that time, I mean, the way I got into this industry was I was doing trade shows and marketing for companies in the cable and connectivity world. And I remember the company that I was setting their booth up, and they were on a speed bump. So because they had the speed bumps in the parking lot. So
Yep.
every time somebody would come to our booth, I'm like, "Whoa, watch out for that speed bump."
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's been interesting to see it over the years. It seems like from the pre-con stats that you mentioned and the additional people showing up, we're getting close to being back to pre-COVID levels of attendance.
Very, very close. I mean, I was also pleased. I think there were a few people from outside of the US, like from our Japan affiliate as well as our South Pacific. This time, with 130 attendees from non-US country, being from 28 different countries, I was very happy to see so many international people coming together. I saw them in committee meetings. Well, that's another thing. This is the first time we've had in-person committee meetings
Oh,
since
wow.
COVID. Since COVID.
Wow.
So that was a lot of fun, is seeing everybody get together, because that's where people are really doing a lot of the networking, is at these committee meetings and exhibit hall. It just felt back to normal, and we
Yeah.
didn't have to wear masks.
Yeah, that was nice. That
Yeah,
was nice.
yeah,
Yeah, and there's a lot you can get done in a virtual meeting, but you get so much more out of the face-to-face sessions with people, and especially in the committee meetings. I imagine you get a lot more accomplished when people are right there with each other brainstorming.
yes, yeah. I agree. I'm sort of, what do they call, zoomed out.
I hear you. I hear you. So, you sent us some pictures that I'm going to pull up here, and there were some awards, I guess, and some other things. So I'm going to pull this up, and and
Oh yeah. So everybody, if you don't know Patrick McLaughlin, then you've got your head in the sand. Um, so so every year, the biggest award at the end is the Presidential Eagle, and the person who gets that has been a huge contributor to BICSI, has been involved in the industry, has been a huge contributor to the industry. And for me, it was a no-brainer to select Patrick McLaughlin. He and I started the industry around the same time. And, he's amazing with his webcasts, his seminars. You see him on the show floor interviewing people, whether it's exhibitors or presenters. He just has got the pulse on the industry. And I say that he's like the guru of the ICT, because he just is right there with groundbreaking news on whether it's a market trend or whether it's a product. So, Patrick was well deserving, and it was great because he had no clue.
that's great. That
Uh,
that's fantastic, and like you said, well deserved.
yeah,
I've known
very well
Patrick
deserved.
for a few years, and I've been interviewed by him a couple times, and had him host webinars that I participated in. He really is an asset to our industry.
Yeah, and he just, so of course, he's very involved with social media and his newsletters, his magazine, and of course, Cable Installation and Maintenance Magazine, I think, is the last one that still is available in print.
Hmm.
So, kudos to him, because when I started, there were 4 magazines that covered our industry, and now I really consider, CNM to be it.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
they're
They're
on
the
it.
one that stood the test of time for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
anybody
then
who knows, oh my, yeah. So Patrick, yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, Chuck Bowser the third, he won the Member of the Year, and that he was another one that was very surprised to get it. And I don't understand why these people are so surprised, because they're really ingrained in our industry. Chuck Bowser is constantly doing podcasts on LinkedIn. He constantly has those, guess what this acronym means.
hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
he also has quite a few people that he interviews. he wanted me to be interviewed at the very beginning of my president-elect. And I was a little shy at that time because what can I say? What can't I say?
Right.
So he said he's going to get to me yet, but
He will.
he was well deserving of this award.
Yeah, I've been a fan of Chuck's for quite a while now. I've been a guest on his podcast. He's been on Tech Talk with me a couple times, and he's always a fan favorite, is one of the terms I think he likes to use too. But
Yeah.
one thing I really like about Chuck is that everything he seems to do is driven at uplifting the other members in our ICT community, helping people to learn, helping people to understand, and we need a lot more Chucks in the industry.
Yeah. And
So,
I feel the same way about Patrick too.
oh
He
yeah,
always is right there. I think Chuck and Patrick are two of the, most dedicated people in the entire ICT industry. So
they
I
absolutely are.
was, yeah,
We're lucky to
you know,
have
the
people like that.
yeah, the award ceremony is one of my favorite events because, first of all, the award winners aren't told. So the surprise factor is always fun, but also to see, the reaction of the crowd as well. Hey,
Yeah,
that person really deserves it. And so I'm really pleased as to all the award winners this year.
yep, yep, absolutely. I think I've got a couple more here. Cabling
Oh,
skills challenge. Yeah.
yeah. So this is the 15th year of the Cabling Skills Challenge. There were 12 competitors and over 20 judges. And this is Thomas Pate, and he was the winner. Of course, he's very happy. I don't know, he's more happy with the big trophy he's going to try and figure out how to get on the plane, or the big check he's trying to figure out how to cash.
and, and in case anybody watching hasn't witnessed the cabling skills challenge, essentially you get techs in there who are competing. They're doing what they do for their livelihood. They're
Right.
terminating cables, copper and fiber. They're testing it. And they literally go head to head. They're timed. So
Yes. Yes.
it's
And it's
very
difficult too. Like when you're seeing, it's right on the exhibit floor, and when you're seeing it going on, it's hard, trying to not interrupt them because they're in the mindset and they have to do this and they have to, put the system together. They have to splice fiber. They have to connect the copper. They have to test it. It's just everything that they would be doing in their job. So they really have to focus, on the task at hand.
exactly. And
Yeah.
always in the back of their mind is the next person over. How far ahead of me are they? Do I need to cut a couple seconds off my time? So
Yeah.
there's always that.
Yeah. I don't know how. Yeah. So I try not to even talk to them at the very end. I go in there and when they're done and talk to them and also thank the judges. It's a lot of hard work. So Dave Richards, who's pictured there with Thomas and myself, is the president-elect. He will start his presidency in 2024. And he is the, I guess, brainchild behind Cabling Skills Challenge. So
Ah,
he is, I'm just, it's great to see who's going to be following me, that he's been involved in BICSI for as long as I have.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. BICSI Cares, always
Oh,
a favorite.
that's another, yeah. So that's my favorite as well. So BICSI Cares, so it's a children's charity. If anybody doesn't know that we collect money for during the conference and even after the conference. And so this one they selected a charity called Heartfelt, and the FELT stands for Feeding Empty Little Tummies.
Ah,
And I think their annual budget is about $25,000, and the BICSI Cares Committee was able to get $28,000 in donations.
that is huge.
So that's huge. And the woman, I'm sorry I don't know her name, but the woman who's up on stage, on the far left, that's when they revealed the check, and she was just overwhelmed. It's more than her year's budget. So she was,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's one of the things I've always liked about BICSI Cares is whatever town we're in for the conference, whatever city we're in, they find that local charity,
yeah,
and that's what they raise the money for. So they're supporting where we're having the conference, which is great.
yeah, yeah. The other picture, So what they had in the BICSI Hall, of course, because we're commemorating the 50 years, they had a big, huge graphic going through the decades. I think they could have had a lot more photos, but what I'm pointing to, this is pretty funny, Steve. So, as I mentioned, I got into this industry by doing trade show booths, and I'm pointing to my son, who at the time was probably 10 years old, and he helped me set up the booth. That's when they used to let kids into the booths and help their parents set up. Of course, now, child labor laws would have my hand slapped. But he's now 35, and he attended
Wow.
BICSI. He came to the business meeting, and he was at the banquet and saw the
Wow.
closing. So
Wow,
yeah,
that's
so
cool.
that's funny.
And I remember, back in the early days, Ray Gendron running around.
Oh,
You couldn't escape Ray. If you didn't have a sticker on your badge, he'd find you.
yeah, the BICSI Cares,
Yep.
Ray Gendron, he was so awesome. And I remember when kids were allowed to help their parents set up in the booth, or they were just allowed to go in the exhibit hall before, all these other laws. And he would take young kids like my son and give them candy bars and bring them soda. And while he's running around collecting money as well. So, and then of course, if he's bringing a kid with him, how could you not?
Exactly.
You can donate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a wonderful man.
Yeah. Great guy. Great charities. This is another big event that happened. So because 50 years of conferences, many of which were held in Tampa, and of course the BICSI headquarters is located in Tampa, the city of Tampa and the convention center dedicated an etched paver right there outside the convention center, right on the Riverwalk in Tampa. So these are officials from the city, from the convention center, as well as BICSI staff. John Daniels, which is the CEO of BICSI, and of course, Dave Richards, the president-elect. So this was a huge honor for them to recognize, BICSI's contribution, not only to the convention center, but also the fact that their headquarters is in Tampa.
Yep. Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Looks like the new board.
Oh, this is the 2023 board. So we said goodbye to, you don't get a brand new board the whole time. The positions sort of are staggered so that you don't have a brand new board every year, because then you have to go through the process of the training and orientation. So we have a few new members. And so here I am presenting the entire 2023 board to the attendees.
Gotcha. And then here we've got a couple shots you sent us.
Yeah. So I thought this was, okay, first of all the speakers were great. And all the speakers put a lot into their presentations. And then we have some keynotes. And this keynote speaker, Shirley Bloomfield, is from the broadband side. In fact, she's the CEO of a broadband association. And she was specifically talking about the funding that government is getting and then distributing out to get broadband everywhere. Because, during COVID, we learned that not having broadband or internet stifled our careers, our children's education. So now the government is funding these cities and towns and even Indian reservations to put broadband in. So here she is talking about all of the funding and how to get access to it. And of course, all the members that were there in attendance are like, how can we get the money? How do we go to our local officials? How can we get involved to help? Because our contractors, they're installing the infrastructure.
Yep.
So she was very full of knowledge and helpful information.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And then, of course, that was the opening where I said, hey, you guys are great. We're here back together. And then but you can still go online and see it. And you know what? We haven't even talked about the exhibit hall.
Yes. So I've got, here's one quick slide I'll show you from the exhibit hall. We'll come back to this. This is something we got to mention. This was a really cool display I saw at the exhibit hall with single pair Ethernet. As you know, we have a testing adapter, or a
Right.
couple of them for single pair Ethernet, but I hadn't actually seen any active components until I ran into this booth, and they actually had they had SPE switches, but they also had, for the endpoint devices, you know, the cameras and whatnot, they had media converters to go from 10 base T, which is what a lot of those devices run on, to the single pair Ethernet. So you could run single pair Ethernet for your cabling infrastructure, and then just use a media converter out at the camera or the sensor, and run a short 10 base T patch cord to the device. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, so
That's a great thing about these exhibits, because then you can actually see the whole system put together. One thing I wanted to ask you is I saw a lot of, and even there was a presentation on pushing past 100 meters. So there were some cable companies that showed. I really want to get your information on how do we test it if it's not standards compliant?
Okay, that's a great question. So there are a couple ways to answer that. There's several companies that are doing solutions like this, where they go extended distance. You know, you've got Belden and Page Datacom, Superior Essex, and you've got things like Game Changer. You've got the PowerWise from Superior Essex. They're all designed to go a little further. And from back in the day, I mean, back when you and I studied and took our RCDD exams, it was just drummed into our heads: 100 meters, 100 meters, 100 meters. You don't want to go beyond that. Well, and there's reasoning behind that. From a networking standpoint, you can have issues with collisions and things like that. But the new cables that they're putting out there will actually go further. And Paul Weintraub from Superior Essex likes to put it this way: standards can be deviated from when there's a good reason. If technology develops a better way to do something, then that's actually going to drive future standards. So that's how we get the standards in the first place,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
But when it comes to testing these things, you can't use a standards-based test. You can't use a Cat 6a or a Cat 5e test, because it's going to fail due to length. But you can use things like an applications limit. So you could test it for 1 gig if you wanted to. What we've got, in addition to that, and also I'll back that up a little bit. In addition to the applications limit, you have vendor-specific limits. So Page Datacom has a limit for their cable. Superior Essex has a limit for their cable, and as long as it passes that, they'll warranty the system, even if it's longer than the 100 meters. But going beyond that, we want to know, is it going to work with my network? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here again, and let me pull up my tester, and I'll show you something real quick. I've got a link here. So and this is the same tester we use for certification. So what I'm doing is, instead of doing a certification test on this, I'm actually going to do a multi-gig and PoE test. Now, I could do this all the way up to 10 gig, but I'm just going to do a quick test. I'm going to run it up to 2.5. I'm just going to look at 1 gig, look at 2.5 gig. And what we're doing is, after the network electronics have been installed, you've got a switch on the far end, or you can use a Test Pro main and remote to do this. And if you wanted to test PoE, you could run it through an injector. But what you're doing is you're testing after the network has been installed. You've got your network components in there, and we go out to the endpoint. We're testing back to the switch, and we run traffic on the link, and we measure the strength of the signal versus the strength of the noise. So you get an SNR value, signal to noise ratio. Higher the number, the better. And here we can see we passed 2.5 gig fine. If we had a problem, we could click view, and we can look at the pair detail. And at that point, I'd go back to a physical certification test to get a little more details about what's going on with the cable. But we also
Well,
see
and I see that it says 144 feet.
right now, note that this says approximate length.
Yeah.
So in this case, we're measuring length with an Ethernet port. It's not going to be as accurate as the certification test port. So that's why we put approximate on there. So this will give you the length. This is a shorter run. I don't have a 150 meter run here that we could test, but the principle would be the same. So if we had, let's say we had 120 or 130 or 140 meter run, we would hook this up at the end of that run, going back to the switch, or going back to a Test Pro remote on the far end, and we'd run this test, and it would tell us if we can support that 2.5 or that 5 or that 10 gig, depending on what we're doing. Because maybe we're putting an access point out and we've got a 5 gig pipe going to it or a 2.5 gig pipe, and we want to test it to that. So this will tell us if we can support that, as
Well,
well as,
that's great. Yeah, that's great. So yeah,
and then
yeah, wondering how you get around the 100-meter limit. So this is
that.
awesome.
Yeah, so you're essentially stressing it. You want to see how it's going to perform with traffic and load, and we do PoE load test at the same time, so you can determine how much power am I getting at that endpoint. So if your SPE, your PSE is present, I got SPE on the brain. If your PSE is present, you can actually see how much power you can deliver to the endpoint as well in that same test. And these could be saved just like a certification test, so that when you go in and want to provide your test documentation, you've got your certification test here, but you can have this test here that shows your PoE was good all the way up to 10 gig, shows you what your power was. And it's kind of an additional documentation for the customer. And I'm going to go back off of sharing my screen here. So
Well,
it's
I bet you the next BICSI, maybe they'll that standards will be catching up to this.
Yeah, it's when we talk about the smart building stuff, and this the two master classes that I participated in, we talked about these tests because back in the day, cable certification was our mantra. We need to certify the cable, and that's still very important. It's critical for the job. But as smart buildings evolve and all these new technologies that are there, like in the cabling installation and maintenance article that you wrote recently, that talks about smart buildings, it talks about the Marcel and digital electricity and all these
Yeah.
things and PoE. As these things are being deployed in buildings, the cable test isn't enough anymore. You can do a cable test with DC resistance unbalanced, which will tell you my cable should support PoE, but it doesn't tell you what the performance is when everything's installed and it's up and running. So it's important when it comes to smart buildings for us to be able to not just certify the cable, but be able to show that end customer, hey, look, everything's installed. Here's proof you're getting your PoE to the endpoint. We're giving you your 5 gig for your access points. Everything is functioning as it should. It also helps the installers avoid the truck rolls for callbacks. Or if they do get a callback, they can prove it was working when we left. Now it's not working. We run another cable test. Oh, somebody cut the cable and put wire nuts halfway down the run. It
Yeah,
happens.
that's my favorites. Let's talk about splicing copper.
Yeah, exactly. So I mentioned the cabling installation and maintenance article. So anybody that hasn't had a chance to look at this, we talked about Patrick at the very beginning. This magazine's Patrick's baby, right? So Carol wrote a fantastic article in here. It talks about the Marcel, talks about Sinclair Digital, and what they did for the Marcel, and they kind of used the Sinclair Hotel in Fort Worth as a learning platform to see what they
Yeah,
were
it
going to do
was.
in the new one.
Yeah, for a couple of things. Yeah, for power over Ethernet, everything PoE from their lights to their shades to, every possible application they could. But this was also one step further. It's a net zero building, which means they produce more electricity than they use. And
Exactly.
you're using a lot of digital electricity. So it was a very, very progressive, unique hotel stuck in a very old building, which made it even more interesting because it's a historical building, just like the Sinclair was or is. And so, to the installation of these systems in this building that was built like 40, no more than that, back in the 1960s, I believe. It was amazing feat. And there were a couple of presentations on this. The presentations were really pretty awesome because it's all this new technology that's coming up. How do we keep ahead of it? You just can't.
It's tough. And being involved in organizations like BICSI helps because you get the education. You
Yeah.
go to these conferences and you can learn so much. I mean, if I could attend every single session, I would, but you can't. but there's so much to learn, and we all have to stay on top of it because it changes so fast. I mean, I
Yeah,
remember back in the 90s when we got 10 base T to the desktop, we thought, holy cow, this is great. We're never going to need anything faster than this, and now nobody uses 10 base T, except
right,
for low bandwidth stuff.
right.
You
Low
wouldn't
power,
run
low
that from your
bandwidth. Yeah,
computers, even in your house. You wouldn't run that anymore.
yeah.
So, but yeah, it's really amazing to see this change, and I know Luke over at Volt Server, and
Yes.
that product, that's like the backbone of all this stuff. When you look at it, DC
Well,
power.
there was a session that it was a panel that was on BICSI stage. I believe was it Wednesday morning? Yeah, I can't remember, but it was Farouk Aslam, who's the brain behind the Sinclair,
Yes.
and he was on stage with, pretty sure it was Volt Server and an electrical, because there's a big fight on whose responsibility is it when you're running power over Ethernet. You need low voltage installer can install it. We don't need the electrical contractors anymore, but the electrical contractors are pretty smart with how much electricity do you need. So it's more like a partnership than one versus the other. So I think that it cleared up a lot of misconceptions that there's a low voltage versus electricians. There shouldn't be. They should be working together.
Yeah, exactly. And I had Louis Swow from Sinclair on a
Yeah,
previous episode, and we talked about just that it's incumbent low voltage and the electricians to work together with stuff like this, because it's that's how we move forward. And yeah,
yeah,
there's going to be some heartburn. There's going to be some electricians unions that don't want the low voltage technicians installing cabling that's going to be used for any kind of power. And some of them, if they had their way, we couldn't even install PoE circuits. But the reality is there's something to be learned from both sides of that equation, and
exactly.
and I think cooperation is the key.
Yes, exactly.
So
And I was good to, and then, another thing is that Nika and BICSI had a summit last year, and they're going to do it again. So it's a summit, like a conference that has both the electrical side and the low voltage side coming together. So it is planned for the end of June in Denver. So
oh,
everyone should
great.
look at that. Yeah, I liked going to it last year. I learned a lot from the electrical side. So that was pretty interesting.
And Denver's a good place to go in June. So
That's true. That's true.
yeah, yeah. One last question for you, Carol. You mentioned early on, we talked about how during COVID we went virtual, and now we're kind of doing a combination. So if God forbid we have to revert back to all virtual again because we have another pandemic flare up or something, how easy will it be now that BICSI's learned a lot of lessons over the last couple of years? How easy will it be for us to transition to an all virtual conference should we have to?
Okay, so heaven forbid. But the good news is BICSI stepped up very quickly. They all of a sudden in 2020, right after our winter conference, the world shut down. BICSI staff engaged with companies that could actually put these platforms together. And BICSI was really at the forefront. I saw some other virtual conferences at the very beginning that just didn't work. This was the virtual conference was from VFairs was very interactive, and they keep improving upon their virtual. I think we'll always have that virtual part of it because there will be people who will be a little hesitant for a couple more years, maybe more, to not travel or not get together. As you said, the networking face to face is bar none better than virtual. But because BICSI's already been through this exercise, I think they're well equipped if we had to do it again. We are seeing more in person events, but BICSI will continue to do like the virtual ICT forums and also their international conferences virtual as well. And that kind of makes the world smaller if they can start doing all of their conferences both virtually and in person.
Yeah,
So that, yeah. I mean, I personally would like to travel all over the globe and see people in person, but maybe just not feasible. And it's
yeah,
our industry that makes this virtual platform even work. All of the innovations that ICT has provided, and all these companies, exhibitors, and our members, and everybody involved. So it's basically the BICSI audience, the ICT community, that has made us get through COVID.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Well, Carol, that puts us a little past our 30 minutes,
Oh,
and
good. That went by quick.
it went fast. It always does.
Yeah.
And always great to chat with you. I love
Good
seeing you
seeing you.
at the conferences. Good seeing you again this year, and really appreciate you joining us today. And thanks to everybody who attended today's episode. And be sure to check us out if you didn't get a chance to watch us live. And you have questions after this, post them, and we'll answer them. Or if I can't answer them, I'll get with Carol and we'll get you some answers. And everybody just have a great, safe rest of your week. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.